I'm making an EP with under $1,000 worth of gear. In the first episode, I outlined all the different pieces of equipment that I'm using to do that. In the last episode, I talked about the beginning of the recording and demo process of the first track that I'm making for this album. In this episode, I'm going to dive into the nitty-gritty of production, from recording different instruments, to patching things together in my DAW, to different plugins, panning, early mixing, and all of the different strategies that I use to make this first demo come together. Then I'm going to show you the very first demo track from this project. I have absolutely loved the way that this project has pushed me creatively to find new and exciting ways to create sounds and to create music with a small amount of equipment. I think that diving into the mixing process of this really shows how much opportunity you have within constraints even as small as these ones. I had an absolute blast with this first track because I just felt a freedom to do whatever I want. I didn't have to follow any rules. I didn't have to care about the things that you're supposed to do or the equipment you're supposed to use. I just got to make this song. So let's check out this full walkthrough of producing track 1 off this album, 11th River. The first thing that I recorded was the guitars on this, and we have a couple of different guitars. I have a mic. For the mic piece of this, I'm using an SM57, and this is usually around the 12th fret of the guitar. There's a couple points on this though that I wanted to capture more bass frequencies with it, and I actually put it closer to the sound hole, but this is a piece of that recording, and then the other one is I just have my direct plug into the guitar. So I'm doing both of those in unison so that I get a nice track doubling on this project. We have this first bit that we play on this, which sounds kind of like this. And there's a few different things that are happening within this guitar track, but really not too many. So first, on my mic'd acoustic, I just have a channel EQ. It's on there. This is the first thing that's coming in. I'm just boosting a little bit in the low mid and the high mid and just cutting off some of the stuff that I really don't care about that's going to interfere with other things. I haven't gone too crazy with the EQ on this yet. And then I have a basic compressor over here. I'm mixing that right in with this acoustic. This is the direct, which also has a channel EQ on it. However, on this one, I'm doing a really tight boost at around the 1K mark. I really want that mid-ranginess in it, and then I'm cutting some of these extra highs. The reason that I'm doing that is because I'm taking this into just Logic's version of a fuzz face. This is cranked, as you can see. I have the fuzz all the way up on this, and when you blend those together, you get this really nice kind of dirtiness. So this is the just direct with the fuzz. And then on this other one, we're also sending it into this acoustic reverb channel, which is this fully wet kind of concert hall sort of vibe, which is where you get this nice like springy, big and wide sound, which is really cool. But when you put the two of those together, it sounds like this really nice full. I really liked the way that sounded. However, one of the first things that I wanted to do was to also get this bass guitar kind of sound in it. So what I did is I used my thumb and I recorded just the bass notes on these guitar parts. So once again, we have a mic'd and direct. For the one that's mic'd, I put a little bit of gain on it because I recorded it at a little bit of a low volume. We have a channel EQ that's just scooping everything out except for where this bass frequency lives. And then we have another compressor on there. And then for the direct, we are also using an EQ. This one's a little different. We're scooping a big chunk of mids out because I don't want it to conflict with that other guitar that we have on this. But we're leaving a little bit on the high because I want the sound of the finger hitting the string. And then once again, we're boosting this low here. However, after all of that, we are sending this into a very, 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 very small amount of blended reverb that's in here. This is less reverb and more of a rune designer, and it's just to give some of the sustain that you might get from an electric bass that we're missing on this. So those two together, without the guitars, sound like this. We add the guitars back in. Sounds really cool. The next thing that I worked on the acoustic side of things is we have this next bit, which is in 5/4 timing, and that bit sounds like this. And I really love the way that this turned out. So once again, this is the mic'd and the direct that we're blending together. We have just a little bit, tiny bit of boosting on the mic EQ because I actually really liked the way that this turned out on its own. And then for the direct, we have a different EQ that's on here, big boost between 500 and 800 and a big cut up here on the highs. And that's because I wanted this direct one to capture more of the low end sounds of the guitar and the other one to be focused more on the highs, and they blend together pretty nicely. What I think is exciting about these though is when we go into the send that we're using on this. So what I've got is these running into first a tape delay. You can see that I'm letting it use the entire range of frequencies on this. We've got like a 50% output, but we have a good bit of this like modulated flutter that's happening in it. There's a little bit of modulation on that dotted quarter note delay. I really liked the way that sounded, but I wanted to give it even more character, and so I'm using this large wooden room reverb, just 1.9 seconds of decay, and when you send that into the tape delay in front of the reverb, you get this really lush sounding. And I thought that sounded really cool. We do have one more little set of guitars on here. Once again, this is both the mic and the direct that we're using. This is where it switches to a 4/4 time signature, which I think is kind of an accident, but turned out pretty cool. And these have different EQs as well. This first guitar that's on here, you'll notice we've just got a big subtraction here in the low and a tiny, tiny boost just above 2K. And that is just about the gist of the acoustic sounds. We've got the only other one we have is kind of at the end here, where we have this little bridge thing. But now I want to show you guys some of the other things that I put on this. Now, the first foundational thing that I did on this actually had to do with the drums. So one of the ways that I wanted to challenge myself with this track is I'm not using any MIDI drums. I'm actually using all personally recorded samples. So the first one that I played with is actually a recording of the river running where I wrote this track. So I just took my phone, I made a little voice memo recording of the river running, and that one sounds like this. Now, my first thought was I could totally make this into a cymbal or a hi-hat or something, and I ended up doing both. So first we have this, what I'm calling the water cymbal on this track, which sounds like this. And the way that I'm doing this is that I've loaded this sample just into the basic Q sampler on Logic Pro. I've adjusted the length of the loop to be how long I want it to be. I've made it a little bit coarser. I've added a tiny bit of glide to it. You can see that I've cranked the cutoff filter up here, and I've cranked the drive on this, and I've adjusted the kind of attack and decay a little bit over here in this little sample to give us this nice little weird water symbol. Then after that, we've got the EQ, which is going to be really aiming in on the highs to give that high-end side of sound that a cymbal has. I'm actually keeping a little bit of the low in here because I liked it, and scooping out some of these mid-ranges. This gets then sent into this drum room reverb, which is blended pretty modestly with 70% dry, 50% wet, but a very long decay because that's what cymbals do. And then all of that gets bussed into a greater drum room, which I use to mix all of the drums together. And that is just so that everything has this same additional kind of decay on it that makes you feel like you're in the same room. The next thing that I did, especially starting here at the beginning, is I added this boot kick. which is another sample. I recorded myself downstairs in my home on these nice wooden floors. I used an SM57, just pointed at where I was going to stomp, hooked up the interface, and recorded some sounds of me kicking the floor in various different ways. We have a couple of different boot kicks that we recorded, and I use them differently throughout the song, but this is the hard boot kick. And you can hear this one actually has a lot of verb on it. The way this looks is there's our sample again. Then I've gone in with the EQ. We've way boosted the low and boosted the high just a little bit because that's kind of the sound of the boot kicking the floor, and taken out all the stuff we don't want it to compete with, sending that once again into the same drum room that everything else is sent into. However, I do have a second one in here. This is the exact same sample, but I have a different EQ on it. You can see the low is cranked on this, and we've got some subtractive mid-range EQ, and this guy gets run into our sub bass. And this is barely blended into the mix, but is here just so that we can get some oomph out of this that we would miss from the fact that it's, well, a boot. And that gives us a really nice low end impact. I know that I'm breaking rules here too, and I don't really give a shit, because this is one of those things where you should just follow your heart. So next up with these kicks, we end up over here, which is the second 5/8 section of the song. And we have two things that are going here. We have a softer boot kick, which is a different sample, and I actually wanted this to be felt much more than heard. So this is our sample. You can hear it's nice and soft, and we have scooped in the EQ and post a lot of the high end out of this. So it's very much just this low end focus, which I think feels really cool for the way that it drives the song. In conjunction with it, we have another use of the water sample. This one sounds a little bit different, and you can hear it right here. It's much shorter and much brighter. So when we put those two together, we have another type of drum, however, that comes in during the 4/4 section of the song, or the pre-chorus, you might call it. And here I wanted to change the type of sample that I used entirely. So for this, we are actually using my acoustic guitar as the drum, and we have two different sounds going on this. Now the first one is a kick, which sounds like this. And you can tell that it's really not as low as you might think it would be, but we have two EQs on this. We've got this one that is boosting the low a ton, and we have this one which is just cutting out a ton of the highs. And that one is actually coming in post compression, which is just to make this kick sound really consistent. Above this, we have another drum part, and these go together in a really neat way. So here is what it sounds like dry. And we've added a lot of things to give this character. So first and foremost, I played this, quantized it to make sure that it hit right, and then we start with an EQ at the very front of this. This EQ is cutting a lot of the lows out, boosting us between 1 and 2K, and then way boosting it up here at 6K. We have a compressor. We're running that into a space emulator. However, we're using a transformer on this to actually change the sound. So if I turn this off, sounds like this. If I turn it on, you get this completely different sounding drum. And all of this gets sent into a special little delay system that we're running for this, which has a pitch shifter that's pitching up an octave at a 25% mix, and then a stereo delay that's meant to ping pong the drums, which sounds really cool when you've got headphones on. And lastly, has a flanger in there on a quarter note dotted setup. Sounds really odd by itself. However, when I add in the guitars with it, it makes this really cool big picture. I often like to talk about music production in a similar way to food. It's kind of like you're making a sandwich. If you make a sandwich that's all really soggy and wet, no one's going to enjoy it. Just like no one wants to bite into a sandwich where everything has been burned and is crunchy and hard. You want a nice equal mix where you have something of a different texture in all of these different places. And what I think that does is it adds a really cool texture to a part that otherwise you might consider to be very wet. So those are the foundational pieces of this track. The first things that I recorded were the guitars and these drums, and I think that they really gave it a lot of life, and I really enjoyed the way that they sounded. So then I had to go to vocals, which these are kind of barely better than scratch vocal takes. I didn't do a lot of them. I just wanted to get them down and have an idea of what we're doing. So we have a main vocal that comes in and sounds like this. Does the river run slower in November? And we've got a few basic things on there. The first one that we do have is some very light pitch correction on there just to make sure that everything lines up. And that's, like I said at the first video, everything in here is going to be stock plugins. So that's just Logic's pitch correction. We're running that into some distortion. And then we have an EQ that's taking out some mids, giving us a little bit of high and a little bit of low mid. This goes into our compressor. And then I'm using a little tiny bit of a chorus effect on the end of this, and all of this gets bussed into my Vox effects channel, which has a tape delay barely mixed in, just a little bit, 20% here. And this goes into our reverb, which goes into another channel EQ that just takes out the highs and the lows a little bit. Then we've added under this a low harmony that sounds like this. Does the river run slower in November? And this is being run into a few different things. Once again, just a pitch corrector, very mild on here. That goes into a pitch shifter, where we've got 25% of a full octave down. This goes into another distortion, and then that goes into our channel EQ, which is just boosting right over here around 500 Hertz. This once again goes into the same reverb channel as our standard vocal effects. And then we have a high harmony that is also kind of doing the same thing, except this one goes into the same channel as all of these oohs and ahs, and we love some oohs and ahs. So let's talk about the oohs and ahs. All of these are meant to accompany our starting riff, the kind of big chorusy riff to this song. There's no lyrics, but we wanted to have a melody there that we get stuck in your brain, use a vocal. So we've got some hard pannings on these and just a few different sounds in them. So we've got a high ooh. We have a double on the high ooh. Those are hard pan just to give us a cool stereo effect. We have a low O. And we have this line that gets sung through it, which we've sung double and hard panned. So all together. And all that plays over the big picture of this song. So the very last thing that we added to this was just some kind of little sounds and little pieces of ambience to fill the space. And for these, I use different MIDI instruments. So the first thing that I added to this was I added this little cello sound, and this cello sounds like this. It's this fortepiano cello. You can see that I have the cutoff here turned all the way up, the volume all the way up. I didn't really do a lot to change this. I generally liked the sound of this cello. We just added some little accents here and there, and it's a nice little track. This is panned all the way into the left ear the entire time. I wanted it to just be this little piece of candy that you kind of hear if you're listening for, but that doesn't come and take anything over too much. The next thing that I did was I added this organ pad, as I've called it, which kind of comes in and out, and it's very simple. I am using Logic's vintage B3 organ. I started with the indie rock organ setup here and made a couple little adjustments to it, but it really sounds like this. Just this nice little chorusy organ. And I'm running that through a tape delay, an 8th note triplet tape delay, which should ping pong just a little bit and modulate a little bit, which I thought was fun. And then all of that has the EQ at the end, where you can see that we're just doing a little bit of subtractive and additive work. Then we have this piano. Here's a little trick for when you're using Logic. Alchemy is awesome. It has every freaking sound in it that you might need. And that's where I found this. And so this is just basically their setup. I switched it to this kind of distant sound, as they call it. And I put a slight EQ on the end, but it sounds like this. It's really just this nice, slow, almost evolving pad, but it still has some of the character of a piano in it. And that is just kind of going through here to accent stuff and reharmonize things and just add a little bit of oomph or kind of give some ambience where ambience is needed. And this is slightly panned over to the right. Lastly, I have this electric piano, which is a Rhodes. Well, it's supposed to be a Rhodes. And that guy sounds like this. And that, I think, is really nice. It's just this nice little bit of accompaniment with the melody or harmony that's going along with different parts of this song. And I have run that into a chorus effect here at 50% mix, just to give it that nice warbly sound. And then there's this EQ here, which is pretty subtractive. I'm taking a lot of stuff out so that it doesn't compete with anything. And we end up with a pretty cool sounding track. One of my favorite things about the demo process is that it's always exciting and that there's not really a lot of stock in it. While when you're producing a final polished version of the song, you're really worried that everything's perfect. And so there can be these times where you're recording the same guitar part for 30 minutes just trying to make sure that you got all of the pieces perfect. Or you spend a full day recording one vocal take just to make sure that you nail it. But when you're doing a demo, it's all just about the creative process, which might make it my favorite part of the whole process. I had so much fun doing this demo, and I actually think that it turned out really well and really interesting for a demo. I really think that this shows off the nature of this project and it being this creative challenge more so than the attempt to create the perfect polished pop song. And I'm fairly proud of what we've come up with already. So I'm going to stop talking and show you this first demo of the first track that I worked on for this under $1,000 EP project. This is 11th River. Like a runner after a race, knowing it first must relax before it can rest, patiently prepare for ease. I know it's true. Turquoise and green run together, sacred premonitions lost in the thrill, swept up in the brushstrokes. Does the child remain? Do we both run like the river, or are we the same?
secret premonitions, lost in the thrill, swept up in the brushstrokes. Does the child remain? Do we both run like the river, or are we the camera waiting? My senses again. Discontentment has colored the world so different. The sun feels best in the winter. A cool breeze refreshes in July. Whiskey tastes best on a rainy day, and love is found in the reply.
After this first step, I'm really excited to continue working on the rest of this album, and I hope that you'll tune in and watch the rest of the process. So please like and subscribe to the Ragged Oak YouTube, or follow me on Instagram at Ragged Oak. You can also check out the website www.raggedoak.com, or you can listen to my other music wherever it is that you listen to music. If you want to dive even deeper into this process, I encourage you to support on Patreon, where I will be uploading all of the samples that you heard on this episode, as well as chord charts and tablatures if you want to learn these parts for yourself. As we approach the end of this project too, I'll be uploading all of the final stems to Patreon, so that if you're interested in doing your own mix of these different songs, you can do those as well. Just a great free opportunity for you to practice your mixing and production skills. I'm also in the process of recording a long form video on my writing and lyric technique that I call the Melody of Words, and that will also be available to Patreon subscribers. Lastly, if you're an independent musician and you want your music featured in one of these videos, I encourage you to email this email address below and submit one of your songs. If I like the song, I might include it in a future video, because I want to help support other independent musicians who are out there making it work with whatever they've got. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Josh of Ragged Oak, and I cannot wait to show you the rest of this journey.